Welcome to this week's Tanzu Tuesdays. It's crazy that we're already like midway through December. So as usual, I have with me Lee and Whitney, my lovely co-hosts.
Hello, hello. Happy holidays.
Yeah, we're coming into the end of the year here.
It's crazy. How is like 2021 almost over already? What the heck?
Yeah, I don't know what happened this year. It just seemed to go by. I was doing stuff. Did you do stuff?
Are the holidays sufficiently distracting you from how short the daylight hours are?
I don't think that we
Not yet.
get much change in daylight actually here in Hawaii.
Oh,
So that's kind of a nice benefit.
State.
It
Isn't
stays
it
pretty
called
long.
the Sunshine State, Hawaii?
I don't know if that is. Isn't that California?
Oh,
I don't know.
what's
I
Hawaii?
know that we have rainbows here. I mean, there's rainbows on the license plates and stuff.
Okay, that's cool
Not the
too.
license
Sunshine
plate,
State's
an
Florida.
actual real rainbow.
Florida's the Sunshine State. Okay, something.
I mean,
yeah.
that makes sense.
So what's Hawaii then? The what state? Tiffany AI is on it.
I mean, this whole thing of me like searching up stuff, like totally like became a thing because in high school I was asking a bunch of questions and kept getting the why don't you Google it? And therefore it has now become a thing that like I'm just like, all right, guess I'll go look that up right away.
LMGT FY.
Yeah, great website. Have you ever used it? Send it to somebody in LMG FTY or TFY. Yeah. LMG TFY.
The Aloha State.
The Aloha.
Yeah, that makes
Paradise
sense.
of the Pacific.
It's hello and goodbye state. Okay, all right.
Am I frozen?
No.
You're
slow. Kind of frame rate's a bit low, yeah, maybe.
Well, let's go ahead and bring on our guest today. Kris, welcome to the show. We're really excited about your presentation. Well,
sure. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah.
I wish I could tell you what my state motto was, but oh wait, I do. Lone Star State.
The
right?
Lone Star States.
Lone Star State.
That's just
that sounds right.
meaningless.
Fact check or anything, but
yeah, it feels right. Just as meaningless as the Aloha State. Like, okay, what's that even mean?
I'm looking
really
up.
on-brand, though. Yeah.
Yeah. So now, Tiffany, what's your state's motto? Lee, what's your state's motto?
Evergreen?
Evergreen State? Okay.
Or Rainy City, isn't? Yeah, it's Evergreen State.
Yeah, Colorado is nicknamed the Centennial State because it became a state 1 century after the signing of the United States Declaration of Independence.
That's an interesting fact to want to hold on to. Like interesting, like Colorado seems like it has a lot of better things going on. Just in terms
yeah, I don't know. You could be you could be like I don't know,
state,
Carter of the Rockies or
yeah,
yeah. Although I think we have Denver as the Mile High City, so you know that's a thing. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, you're in Denver when you're there, right?
Yeah, like South Denver area.
Do you notice altitude changes when you travel?
I think that just it's like always something that people mention when you're kind of not used to it. Certainly, it's something that I would like keep in mind, but I've like landed in Colorado fresh from California and then gone and played several hours of volleyball. I think that, you know, it's if you're a performance athlete, you probably want to, you know, be a little bit more mindful. But if you're, I mean, I play a lot of sports, so I don't really feel
I understand like from a place to Denver is hard because of the altitude shift, but from Denver to another place, what's that? Is that hard?
No, definitely not. Yeah. I mean, maybe it's
superhuman
just
for a while. You like
something more like
on the thin air and you're like, I got this full powered air. Yeah.
Yeah, they say that the athletes that train at altitude in like Colorado Springs and in Denver, it's like one of the big reasons why the Olympic Training Center is in Colorado.
Oh.
People are training at altitude, so you know, go anywhere and be just
Yeah.
about used to the density of oxygen in the air.
I know I once saw a study that was talking, because again, I lived in Colorado for a while, that talked about the distance that home runs go in the baseball stadiums in Colorado versus elsewhere. And if that's a competitive advantage, because the air is just thin enough, right?
Huh.
The balls can travel further.
Wow.
But then I would always think that, if the athlete has to breathe harder because he's conditioned to a lower altitude, wouldn't that cancel out any benefit?
But not if it's a home run and it's going over a fence. You can run as slowly as you need.
True.
Yeah, I don't know how much I'm breathing when I'm like lining up to bat, right? You know, like,
But it's,
probably breathing out.
It's the running after it, yeah.
Yeah.
the Olympian state, that's a lot cooler than the Centennial State. You know, I think Denver really undersold themselves. It's like Texas Lone Star State is equally as boring, but like Texas doesn't have anything cool that it should be touting instead.
Yeah, it's got some real like rebel vibes, you know.
Yeah.
Or
The biggest state, they could say.
Oh yeah, big.
In the lower 48.
Alaska's bigger. Yeah, it has to be qualified.
I believe California is up there as well, right? Isn't it? Is California the first or the second in landmass?
I think Texas is the largest besides Alaska.
Whenever somebody talks about how big Texas is, I remember one of the first times I ever got told this was, if you lived in Texas and you lived in El Paso, which, as you may know, is way out in the west of Texas, and you decided you wanted to go to the beach, it's closer to drive to San Diego in California than it is the Texas Gulf. That's how big Texas is.
Yeah, so Alaska's #1 at 663,000 miles squared. Texas is 268. California is 163.
Thanks for fact checking us, Tiffany, coming through.
Tiffany AI.
Tiffany AI.
Head to the website, put in your email, and we'll be reaching out when we launch our product.
If you watch the Good Place show, she's like our Janet.
Yes. Yeah, that is a terrific show.
It really is.
Great humorous sitcom style study of ethics. I was really into it.
Oh yeah, I haven't started watching that yet. I was wondering if I should.
Very much.
100%.
Highly
Yeah.
recommend.
And they do a good job of like creating this like wild reality, but they like slowly build it so you go there with them without it ever seeming wild in the moment. But then after you're like with them in wherever dimension you are and you look back to the beginning, you're like, whoa, we've come a long way.
I think that definitely it's one of those shows that hoodwinks people into liking sci-fi, right? It's definitely in that space as well. But you do not see it coming.
Regarding the size of Texas, it's one of the things I really miss about the Midwest. I moved here from Ohio in 2003, but I really miss how close cities are to one another. Like you could just take a day trip to I lived in Columbus, so just take a day trip to Cincinnati, just drive out to Pittsburgh really easily. Chicago, 4-hour drive. And here it's like,
that's what I miss about Europe. Every time I go there,
years.
it's like, oh, you just take a train and you're suddenly in like another country, let alone another city.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember being in Denmark and people were like, "You want to go to Germany today?" I'm like, "What is this?"
What world is this? And yes, please. Yeah, I miss what's the flip side of that? When someone from Europe comes here, they're like, oh my God, I'm trapped in this place. It's just Texas forever.
Everything's the same everywhere.
Yeah.
Denver's got different sides for sure. Yeah. But I mean, definitely it's not got that like urban density that all of Europe has.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the thing for me, it's the visual. Living in Denver, you always knew what direction anything was. You're either facing the mountains or you're not, and you can always orient yourself. But then we travel, like my family came from like the Midwest, and you go to Illinois, and you're like, everything's flat. There's nothing. I don't know what direction I'm pointing right now. I could be driving to Mexico or to Canada. Don't know.
Yeah, actually, that's a really great point. I grew up in Eagle Rock, California, where you're right up against the hills.
Eagle Rock?
Eagle Rock?
Oh, Eagle.
He's up front.
Okay, I heard evil.
Oh.
Like
Oh, not
villain.
Eagle Rock. Yeah, that would be a funny name for a place, wouldn't it be? Yeah, it's like, oh, we don't go there unless, you're trying to harvest evil. But yeah, no, Eagle Rock.
I mean, there's Devil's Rock.
Isn't equally interesting, like monolith though. It's this massive rock with this kind of depressed or like this inset head of an eagle, like inside of it. It's natural. So that's where it gets its name.
Oh.
Pretty cool.
But
Oh, sorry, it's not the head of an eagle. I think actually it's like the wings, like flying. I always saw it as like the head though.
Tiffany's looking it up right now. I can see it in her eyes.
Tiffany AI, head to the website.
We're about to get a link.
Just north,
We're teasing
There's
you.
like multiple pictures of things called Eagle Rock, and two of them look nothing alike. One's listed as LA and one's San Diego County, but one looks like a regular mountain and the other one looks like an actual, like with a bird, I guess, sort of in there, and the other one's actually like a bird.
Yeah, it would be the LA one.
well, just north of Whitney and I is a town called Round Rock. And I remember going there deliberately, and they point you with the signs to the Round Rock. And you go there and you look, and it's exactly what you would expect. It's just a round rock, and like, I don't know what else I was expecting. That's as delivered. It's so boring.
I never even put it together that there might actually be a round rock somewhere up there.
Nope.
I know
It's not extraordinarily big, or didn't have like the 10 commandments put on it, or I mean, there's nothing significant about it in any way, shape, or form.
How big does a round rock need to be for a city to be named after it? That's the question.
Or
12-inch round
where
rock.
does where does it transit from pebble to rock, and is that the cusp in which you name cities? And why not Boulder?
Not Boulder, yeah. How big is the round rock of?
I don't know, probably a meter round.
Is it a spherical rock or is
No, about a meter in
No.
area.
it?
Oh, there's the Eagle Mountain.
Oh, nice. And that's the eagle. Okay, it's like swooping.
The rock looks nothing like what I expected.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you're on mute, Lee. Lee, we can't hear you. Lee, we can't hear you. You can't hear that. Oh, there you go.
Sorry, yeah, I was muting myself, I guess.
Right.
Anyway, yeah, that's the Eagle, and that's the 134, and it's a big rock. It's very large.
Is it good for navigating, like Kris said? Can you?
I used to go to school like where you could actually see the Eagle Rock. Yeah. So, I know when I was going to school and from school.
Could you climb the Eagle Rock?
You can. I have not done that, and I'm not sure if it's allowed.
Oh, well, that never doesn't sound like it would stop you, Lee.
I have climbed a little bit of the Castle Rock, which is in Colorado, and that is allowed.
We have a comment. We have a town here in Sweden called things like Annie Fall, which literally means the place where Anne fell down. Single. My question for that is like, is Anne?
Okay, so this is the Round Rock.
Is it? That's the Round Rock of Round Rock?
Yep.
No.
The river.
Yeah, it's not what I expected. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Not what I expected.
Round Rock, see, Texas just does not have a lot going on. Like that's the kind of thing we need to feel excited about. But our friend Thindle went on to say, I wonder who the poor woman called Anne was, having a town named after her like 250 years later. Wait, so she fell and then somehow it was 250 years later, then they named it? How did the record of that fall last through the ages like that?
You clearly have to do it after she fell sometime later, because you don't want to give a person a big head of anywhere I go, anything I do there will just be named after me.
Well, then they'll just clarify, they named it right away, right after she fell.
And
So
then it just
probably did.
Dangerous precedent. Shouldn't it be?
Probably did get that ego that we feared, yes.
and a fall. I like it.
Oh, yeah. And it sounds like a lot of towns are named in such fashion. Then you start falling in stuff on purpose just because you want it to be named after you.
You know those obituaries, right? Where they're like, you know, and something, you know, lived a bright and brilliant life, you know, moved here after World War II, is survived by her 2 grandchildren and something, and also the name of this town. That
Yeah.
Basically, I hope to have as bold of an obituary when I'm dead.
Well, I wonder if there were like more colorful verbs, like I want a town like Whitney Cartwheel, or
Whitney Cartwheel.
Yeah.
That's
like,
a great band name. You know?
Or like Lee Breakdance, Lee Parkour.
Parkour.
Now
Tiffany
I'm just
Google.
thinking like domains. I'm just thinking of domains at this point. I was like domain searching. But on that note, we really should switch over to Tech Talk.
Okay.
Yeah. I suppose it's a tap talk. Is that what you said?
A tap talk. So Kris,
Yeah. What are we talking about today, Kris?
Yeah, we just brought you on. Will you introduce yourself?
Yeah,
Context. Yeah.
So yeah, again, thank you guys, folks, for having me. Happy to be here and talk to you a little bit about exactly some of the things going on in the Tanzu Application Platform team. So I'm Kris Applegate. I'm one of the tech leads here on the Tanzu Activation Program, which is part of the larger team that's making this large product called Tanzu Application Platform. But I'll be covering here in a little bit just exactly what TAP is, what that larger platform does, and really kind of give you a history of how we arrived at using Backstage as the tool to solve our needs when it comes to a developer portal experience. Should I take it away or?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So again, you know, all the obvious introductions. You know, I've spent a long time here at Dell Technologies, principally a lot of it coming from the Dell EMC side of the house, where I was very hands-on with hardware from a post-sales standpoint, but decided that it was, you know, the things that started to introduce me a lot more, things that orbit around Tanzu and Kubernetes. And so I decided to come across the aisle to our Dell Technologies brethren over here in VMware fairly recently. And so I'm a tech lead on this program that has a couple of key initiatives. One of them we're going to talk to you about today, of the Tanzu Application GUI, but then also things like the Learning Center and the unboxing experience, and even some Community Edition information. But the breakdown of the agenda that I wanted to talk about today is first cover what is the Tanzu Application Platform, and start to talk about what our needs were coming out of that, how we arrived at Backstage, how we created a product out of that, and then obviously get our hands dirty and lay hands on the product and answer any questions that might come up, and what lessons we might have learned, right, that we can carry forward, and how we can take those and help foster growth in the open source community around addressing and fixing those. And then what are our plans for the future, and how we intend to contribute in an OSS fashion upstream. So when we think about Tanzu Application Platform, you'll hear me refer to it constantly as TAP in this. Many folks are familiar with the original Cloud Foundry, now Tanzu Application Service, and what it delivered, the outcomes that delivered to our developers of being able to focus on just being a developer and not have to focus as much on exactly how things passed towards production. And the really Tanzu Application Platform borrows those same outcomes, but instead of doing it on the infrastructure you previously knew as Cloud Foundry, it does it using Kubernetes core primitives. And this starts all the way from the developer first hearing about an application or a service that they might need to interact with, all the way through developing, debugging, dropping that source code that they author into a secure supply chain, and then having that ultimately be pushed out into dev and on into production. And really being able to realize that of let a developer be a developer. And as such, right, we need a place for these experiences to live. Many developers are very comfortable inside command line and inside just editing files and sending those back and forth. But as we start to adopt more and more roles, the rest of the folks that come into play, operational folks and other teams like security, we need a place for the graphical interface to live. And this is what started us down the path of, okay, let's define some criteria for exactly what we want this visualization experience to look like. And so what we needed a framework that was flexible enough to accommodate a whole host of different use cases. There were the ones that we knew about today, and then there are the ones that we don't know about. And so it's got to be extensible enough that we can add additional personas to it. Maybe it's a developer one day, but as we start to mature this, we'll want to bring in a platform operator or some other role. We also needed it to be pluggable. This is one key thing that we can't have one big team develop a single platform and try and build all the functionality into that. It needed to be modular and grow by using plugins or some similar mechanism. We also want to make sure that this is as Kubernetes native as possible. We have to be able to take it and package it and run it on any Kubernetes platform. As much as we here in VMware want to see Tanzu as the Kubernetes runtime everywhere, we realize that we just need a conformant Kubernetes cluster. And as long as we hold dear to those underlying core Kubernetes capabilities and maintain conformance to that, we can take our offering to any one of the public clouds and multiple private locations, et cetera. So it's got to be able to be portable like that. And then we need to be able to interrogate and interact with the underlying Kubernetes API. The platform itself has to be able to sit on Kubernetes and allow us to look at that Kubernetes and be able to get output back from the Kubernetes API, the objects, how they relate to each other, et cetera. So this set us off on a course of work to, obviously, as any company does, is this the time when you develop your own? Is this the time when you mature something you already have? Is this a time when you embrace open source and let it grow? And obviously, we decided to take a look at Backstage. So where Backstage comes from is it's a platform for creating developer portals. And it grew out of a lot of the great work that the team over at Spotify has done. But realizing that this was something that many companies had, they put it out into the Cloud Native Compute Foundation as a sandbox project, just to try and get some additional cooperation, get additional contributions. It's built using JavaScript, right, as is with TypeScript, and it's based on the Material UI. Everything in it is a plugin. This is a really unique perspective here, that you wanted extensible and you wanted a modular service, well, you're going to get it, because it's not like in some other platforms where there is an underlying strata that is Backstage. Every single thing you see in Backstage is just another plugin. There's the default plugin you see when you log in, and then everything else can just build off of that. And there's a whole host of different types of plugins, whether they're core plugins that are governed and maintained as part of the core platform by the Backstage team itself. And that's things like the software catalog, the software templates, tech docs, and the Kubernetes plugin. But then there's a rich ecosystem of third-party plugins that other people can develop and add on and complement this. So, I mean, this ticked all of the boxes for us. that it looked like it has sufficient inertia. It's open source. It can talk to Kubernetes. It's got the plugins and it's very, very flexible. So let's see if we can make this work. This is what took us down the path of, all right, well, let's start with a minimum viable product. Let's do something initially just to see if this is going to work. So for our first alpha, we decided that we need to build this around some sort of core experience. And time again, both talking to other people that use Backstage or hearing talks at KubeCon, et cetera, we constantly hear this idea that the greatest value that I got out of adopting Backstage was discoverability, right? Being able to surface all of the applications that a particular enterprise has, how they relate to each other, how they depend on each other, and just even that they exist is a tremendous amount of values that large enterprises might not have, right? And so that experience is delivered through the core plugin that Backstage calls the software catalog. I know I was conditioned to think software catalog is a list of things that I can pull from if I want to run. Well, think of this as a list of services and applications that are already running in my enterprise. And now I want to dig into more information about them.
I have a question.
Sure.
Are those services and applications in the software catalog, are those ones that are produced within the enterprise, or are those ones that like supporting libraries that developers have access to?
That's a great thing to bring up. So again, when you think about our requirements or something flexible enough to accommodate a lot of use cases, well, you're going to get it, because the software catalog can mean anything, right? You can define anything as a component, whether it's an individual microservice, might be one way you do that, but it could even be an individual asset like a S3 bucket or the actual object inside that S3 bucket. It's whatever way makes sense to you. And there is a hierarchy that you can build in that model of taking these components, the leaf of the tree, the smallest, most granular unit, and then you can aggregate them into a branch or what is called a system. And those systems live on the tree trunk, which is called a domain inside Backstage. And that hierarchy model of how you want to assemble the catalog of information is really flexible. So low-hanging fruit, back to the tree analogy, we wanted to go ahead and jump in, and we knew we needed software catalog, but we also wanted to be able to say, all right, well, if I have something in the software catalog, I want to be able to correlate that to something running on my Kubernetes cluster on that Tanzu Application Platform, right? So I have a service called XYZ. Well, I want to see the pods that make up that service. And their health, and I want to see the replica set that those are built in and the deployment. I need to be able to see and relate from the world of my catalog to the world of actually running on my cluster. And that's what the Kubernetes plugin gave us. Also, as one of the goals of the Tanzu Application Platform is to make the installation experience, very accessible. And so we do that by packaging it in a way that allows us to use our, installer experience, the Tanzu CLI. And we wanted to be able to make sure that we could install this open source software that's got a really different installation routine than you might be used to. We wanted to make sure that we could deliver that as a packaged bundle. We also wanted to make sure that this has that Tanzu VMware look and feel, so that when somebody's in this console, they know, okay, I'm looking at my VMware landscape, right? And we all want to be able to test a plugin. So we're able to deliver all of these in our first alpha, and we got a lot of great feedback, right, on exactly how this could be consumed. So then it was time to iterate. And so as we looked forward into alpha 2, we said, okay, now we really want to start extending this. And the primary means of extending the Backstage ecosystem is by adding plugins. Great. Let's use our teams to author some plugins and be able to derive additional value above and beyond what the core Backstage can do, or even those third-party plugins, and ones that really speak to some of the use cases that we see inside the Tanzu application platform. So the first two that we picked were what's called the Runtime Resource Visibility plugin. And this specifically looks at cloud native runtimes, which is just Knative. right? And it allows us to be able to take a component in our catalog and correlate that exactly all the way to the artifacts that Knative deploys, whether it's the routes that they deploy, whether it's the pods, whether it's the revisions, all of those complex Knative, that complex Knative hierarchy, be able to deliver that for every item in the component catalog if we need it. And then as you do that, when you get down to that pod, what if you needed to be able to do a little bit of diagnosis on that pod? Be able to see how much memory that pod is using. Are there any threads that are throwing exceptions? Can you show me some of the logs on it? This is where one of the other tools inside Tanzu Application Platform comes, Application Live View. We wrote a plugin that would allow you to, in the UI, without needing to change to a whole different UI, surface all of that information. And you'll see when we get into the demo exactly what that looks like. Now, another thing that we wanted to make sure, because this is intended to go out into the enterprise, we have to have some level of security, right? Core Backstage really has what I call the castle mentality of security, right? They have a drawbridge. And in that drawbridge, you can either choose to leave the drawbridge door down and allow everybody in. And once you're inside the castle, you have access to everything. And that might work, you know, for some folks. And since the catalog is effectively read-only, just surfacing information about all of my components might be enough. But we knew that enterprises would want some level of drawbridge control. So we offered the option of being able to integrate with some sort of external identity source. Generic, mechanism like OIDC was definitely par for the course. And so you could either turn on authentication or you could have everybody be a guest. We wanted to test that we could get that working. The last thing we saw was probably the #2 most requested or most used feature from when we talked to other Backstage users, and that's technical documentation. So Tech Docs is a core plugin to Backstage, and it really orbits around the idea that your documentation should live as code alongside your source code. And so that when I go to a Git repository, I have the actual source code for my application, right? And then right adjacent to that, I have the markdown files that generate that documentation. This plugin, as it's displaying all of your components, will automatically go and fetch in real time that documentation and display that to you in context with the component you're looking at. So when we think about that idea of discoverability, of not only can I put the landscape of all the enterprise applications and how they relate to each other, but within one click, you can also get to all of their documentation and make sure it's up to date. Right? Again, very attractive feature we wanted to incorporate. So we were able to do that. And at this point, we were able to make the call that this is going to work for us, right? This is the direction we want to go. And this has taken us to where we launched this week, our beta 4, that is a public beta. We have the Tanzu Application Platform GUI that uses Backstage underneath the covers. We've got those core plugins enabled, that software catalog, the technical documentation, the ability to look at the underlying Kubernetes cluster, but we've added to that some additional plugins that cater to the Tanzu application platform. We already talked about the Runtime Resource Visibility one and the Application Live View, but we add another one that caters to use cases at the beginning of that supply chain. How do I get my starter code in order to build a new service from the ground up, right? That's pretty boilerplate code. It probably looks very similar service to service and shoot, maybe even division to division or company to company, right? A Java Spring Boot application bare bones framework looks pretty similar when you move company to company. This is a tool to interface with our offering called Application Accelerator that helps you pull that boilerplate code from a repository and get started with it. So you'll be able to do that and then put it right into the software catalog once you've created a new component.
Is that something that can be community driven where it can be used from company to company?
Yeah, so that's a great point. One of the items in the Application Accelerator catalog is a generic accelerator so that you can write more of those. right? And it's also another great testament to the capabilities of Backstage here. That application accelerator is built on top of another core plugin that Backstage was already doing called the software templates. And so we simply added additional capabilities to that to address a new kind of template called an accelerator. And we added that right in. So it was very, again, the flexibility of Backstage, bends in our favor yet again. The other capabilities that we have is we want this installable via the Tanzu Application Platform. So this suite of tools that make up Tanzu Application Platform, we want people to be able to say, you know what, just give me the whole thing. And I want it all installed in a seamless manner in a singular experience. And so we're able to make that part of our larger installer, right? When somebody says, give me the full profile of Tanzu Application Platform, we're right there. And then lastly is something where we saw a place that we could contribute some innovation. In the past, the way that the Backstage authentication worked, remember that drawbridge model that I talked about, you could, when you added a new authentication provider, you actually had to go and place the login box using, you're in the code, actually placing the boxes on where they go on the login page. It's not incredibly flexible, and it's certainly not dynamic in any fashion. And we realized that having a whole list of different authentication providers was a key thing that we wanted to be able to meet, but we didn't want our users having to place buttons manually in source code and shimming things inside the CSS. So we built a plugin that actually dynamically assembles that login page for you. If you specify, I want to integrate with an authentication source that is GitHub, that is GitLab, that is guest or doesn't have guest, it will dynamically build that login page and present that to you, just the authentication options you want, right? And we plan on continuing that. So I think
regarding authentication in the drawbridge and castle model, is it an all or nothing authentication where you have access to the whole estate or none at all?
Yeah, so, and you'll see this here in the demo. Once you're in, you can click on show me everything in the catalog. Now, keep in the back of your mind that there's nothing you can do in this catalog to start or stop a service or delete a service or anything that could maliciously affect the actual running application. But yeah, this is the way it was developed. Once you're in the castle, you have free roam. This is one of the areas you'll see that when we cover, where we think we're going next and how we want to help, we need to have some influence and to help that open source ecosystem be able to adopt a more RBAC principled approach to things. This is a real testament to, again, this Backstage grew out of Spotify, and their culture was very much that we have a very flat developer organization and everybody has access to everything and everybody can see everything about everybody. And that's great. And we can still accommodate that, but we also need to be able to accommodate the additional enterprise use cases of, no, we have a very hierarchical organization, or we have strict security or compliance requirements that prevent XYZ from happening. We need more. So yeah, you'll stay tuned to that space. You'll see a lot more innovation. And what I want to do is maybe just go ahead and drop straight into a demo here, just to show you, get some hands-on to see exactly what this experience looks like. So here I have a Tanzu Application Platform cluster. It's spun up and it's running our latest beta 4. Right? This is the public beta that anybody can go out and engage and download. You'll see here, I've set this one up to have 2 different authentication mechanisms, guest or using one of those upstream authentication providers. This one, I chose Okta, right? Again, I could have more and more boxes here depending on which series of authentication providers I wanted, or I could just have guest and everybody gets in. We'll go ahead and go in with guest. So this is actually where it takes you first. This is the homepage that is the catalog, right? And here you see by default all of the components.
Kris, are you able to zoom in a little bit so it's not so small?
Let me see if I can do that.
Yeah, nice, it's better. Thank you.
Yeah, so here you see that software catalog of all the components. Now, it's used your identity to show you only the components that you should see or you probably work with, that you're listed as an owner of. But again, this is everybody, once you're in the castle, everybody can see everybody. I can just come over here and say, show me all, and I see everybody. Again, a very...
What does it take to become listed as an owner?
Yeah, so we'll cover here in a moment exactly where we define the relationships between objects, and one of those is who's the owner. So here you have a list of some sample applications that we have here. Now, again, what you see in the first column is the component, that smallest leaf of your software organization. When I assemble multiple components together, the next hierarchy is a system, right? So maybe component in this case is a microservice, and system is the application that all those microservices make up. And then here I can see who the owner is, and I can see tags and et cetera. I can favorite and edit the entry, et cetera. But let's put a hat on of, I'm a new developer. I just started here at this company, and I've been assigned responsibility for one of these microservices. It's the first website I go to. Well, I'm going to go to here. I need to find out a couple of things about this service that I've been assigned responsibility. It's Yelp UI in this case. I want to find, all right, how does it relate? What does it do? How does it relate to all the other people that make up the same application? And can you show me some documentation on it, right? So this discovery process, right? I'll click on Yelp UI, and here I can see a whole host of information. So I can see a lot of that information that came on the previous pages about who the owner is, what system it's part of. I have a couple of buttons here where I can actually go directly to the source code and see its source. I could click here on View Technical Docs, and you'll see I'll have my documentation dynamically generated for me. This is fresh off the press of the markdown file that sits right alongside that source code. This is the rendered version of that. So this is as up to date as it can possibly be. Right? And then I can go in here and start to see how this relates to some of these other components, right? Do I depend on anybody, or does anybody depend on me? Because if I'm going to make a change, I need to make sure they know about it. I come over here to dependencies. Ooh, I do actually have a dependency on this other Yelp application. I'm going to need to come back to that. Well, what about if I want to see what resources exist on the cluster? I can come over here to Runtime Resources. Ah, okay. So there are some resources that are running on this cluster tied to my component, right? Or my microservice. And I can dive into them and I can see, okay, there's a pod here and it's running here, and this is its image name, etc. I can find out information about the running state of my component. This is all great, but now I need to start figuring out, but what role does this play inside the larger application landscape, right? So now I need to switch from component. Tell me about the larger system if you could. Well, here you'll see a whole bunch more stuff. I can see all the components, both ones that exist on the cluster, as well as maybe things that are foreign to the cluster. You know, Whitney, you mentioned earlier, well, what about if I want something to be something that isn't represented by Kubernetes or isn't represented as an object on the cluster, but is in fact a third-party resource? This is exactly where I can do an off-host reference. And I can see here in one page all the myriad of services that make up this overall application. And this application has his own source code. It takes me right to GitHub. It has his own or their own documentation that references, right? And then to me, this is a feature that I love the most. This is dynamically built based on the relationships that you detail inside your components. It builds you a diagram of exactly, this is what the Yelp application does. This is what all those microservices, how they relate to each other, and getting this in a one, place shop. And it's as up to date as your catalog is, again, is pretty powerful for our users. Now, all of the information about what is a component, how does it relate to things, we store as code. Right? That catalog is simply referencing a Git repository. And we see that out here, right? Of that Yelp catalog, here's all the components, right? And we simply would come in here and say, all right, I have a new component, and here's where I could detail its name. I could add those tags that we saw to it. I can say that it's part of a larger system. I can put who the owner is. I can put who dependencies are.
Can you increase the size again, please?
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so all of that information about how to display this in a catalog, again, like the documentation, is kept as code, right? Again, developers are really great and have refined approaches on how to deal with code. So let's bring as many things into that world as possible: the documentation, the catalog itself, etc. So now when I go back here, let's take a look at some of the differentiated plugins that we've started to introduce. So when you saw me go into Yelp, that was just an off-the-shelf Kubernetes plugin. We had our own UI on how we displayed that. But what happens if we look at something that's an actual Tanzu Application Platform application, one that was created by an accelerator and put through that secure supply chain running in Knative? You're going to see it's decidedly different. And again, I'll come in here and I see all that same information. If there were tech docs, I would see that dynamically generated. Again, the GitHub, any dependencies, etc. But I want to draw your attention to this runtime resources. Here, you can actually see all the artifacts, the build pods that were used to actually create the image, the individual Knative service, each revision of that Knative service. And I can dig into that. And I can see that, okay, there's multiple incoming routes. And what's my traffic going to each one of these routes? I have 100% going to one of the revisions, nothing going to the other. All these Knative constructs are surfaced as relevant to this component now. We anchored off of that component, and now we surface additional information. And maybe I'm having a problem with one of these pods. I noticed that one of these shows as not ready anymore, and I want to diagnose a little bit more in detail. I can click on that, and you'll see here, application live view comes up, and I have a whole host of different things that I can interrogate about this. What its current status of threads are, its memory utilization, any cache hits, all sorts of different capabilities that app live view surfaces. We can do that in context with the application itself. It's really that contextual discovery that this enables. Right? And so we've covered the resource visibility plugin, the app live view plugin. Let's talk about the one that got us here. Right? How did we create this application in the first place? This is our list of accelerators. And so you can see these, remember, think of this as that framework to start a new application. All I actually did to create that application that you saw was to come in here to Tanzu Java Web App, populate a little bit of information about it, and then it gives me the source code right on the other side of that. I put that out wherever I need to. If I'm going to put that in Git, I'm going to keep it on my local laptop, whatever. And once I've developed it, I can add it right into the source code, right into the catalog by registering it here as an entity. And now it exists for everybody to start collaborating on. The same thing goes if I wanted to edit any of these existing components that you see here. Right? So you'll see that we're scratching at the surface of the capabilities here. The level of flexibility in exactly what we can introduce, we've got a lot of ideas on where things can go and areas of improvement, both on our own parts and where we want to help improve the underlying Backstage OSS offering. So
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
With the live view part, is that something that's useful for debugging, or if something is going way out of whack, is that going to reveal that to you, or is it something you have to go digging for?
Yeah, so App Live View has a whole myriad of capabilities that can even exist, obviously, outside of the GUI presentation of them. But yeah, it's primarily used for interrogating the individual pods and seeing exactly what was going on. You'd probably see an initial alert at a variety of levels, whether it's your overall Knative service that shows red, whether it's one of the individual pods that shows red. You would have some indicator that your alerting would catch and identify. And yeah, you're right. You come in here and my next step is, all right, well, let me see exactly what's going on with it, right? Does this match my expectations, et cetera, at a fairly low level?
Cool. I don't also want to give you a comment that we got on Twitch, which is that diagram of app components is gold.
Completely agree. It's the shot that definitely sold me on Backstage, and the fact that it's procedurally generated from those relationship files is just, that's killer.
Yeah.
Right? This is just one app. Imagine a full enterprise landscape with thousands of components, right? How they relate to each other under the domains. Again, this is that tree we talked about inverted, right?
Yeah.
The leaves at the bottom. Yeah, so let's talk about where things are going from here. Right? Let's go back to deck here. So, you know, as we look forward, we always want to make sure what are some lessons that we've learned here, right, based on our experience. There's what I always call the battle of usability versus flexibility, and there are areas of opportunity here that can help us make this a little bit more palatable. So the way Backstage works is whoever installs Backstage sits down and compiles in all the plugins they want to use. All those plugins are compiled in at build time and then installed. That means adding plugins, not so easy. And certainly dynamically adding plugins, turning them on or off, depending on your credentials, doesn't really work. Backstage, you light up everything and you deliver that package. So that's an area of opportunity. When we decide to say, you know what, that would be far too much information, compiling a program, packaging it, etc., would be not a pleasant install experience. So we needed to take an opinionated approach to that. We needed to say, okay, well, these are the plugins we're going to turn on. These are the features we're going to turn on. And while Backstage might have more capabilities than that, if you compiled it from source yourself, just like with the Linux kernel, right? You could go out there and have your own, you know, kernel with all the exact features you want, purpose-built just for you, you know, a delicate, you know, fragile thing that is for your specific use case. We need to be able to harden this, and it required this opinionated approach. We also have a high reliance on external services. And this means that the setup, that hurdle, is a little bit steeper for users of, okay, well, we cache all of that information in a database. Do we provide that database? Should we provide that database? Should we allow a customer to bring it? Should we require a customer to bring it? Right? That type of battle. Same thing with Git. We don't host that Git infrastructure. We'll be as flexible as possible. You want to use GitHub, GitLab, public, private, etc. But you're going to have to stand up and maintain that Git infrastructure. You're going to need to bring that to the install routine. Same thing with the documents. They live in S3. Right? Do we provide that object store? No, you need to provide it, whether it's public or private. We need to be able to bring that. Same thing with the identity source, obviously. We have to, if we're going to integrate with something, we don't control that identity source. You need to have that information ready to go when we do the install. And so this laundry list of things that a user would have to bring to this starts to wear away at its usability of, oh, yet another thing, yet another prereq. And so we'll continue to work at this so that we can make this still as seamless as possible while still exposing the power, right, of the underlying Backstage. The next thing I like to talk about is design systems are hard. I am not a design system guy. I envy people that can live in that world, you know, of exactly where things should place and exactly what a component should look like, a visual component in the material UI. So Backstage was written using material UI, and VMware has a standard that we call VMware Clarity. And the two are, you know, Pop Rocks and Sprite. Never the two usually go to each other. So what we actually have to do is, what if we can make material UI look like VMware Clarity? That's a concession that we needed to make, right, to help deliver that overall experience. The other thing that we take away from this is leveraging your plugins to be able to use the underlying Kubernetes API gives you a tremendous amount of strength and power and portability and flexibility. And that is a way that we have seen to be able to do things we didn't think were possible before, as opposed to my plugin talks to a third-party backend service that's somewhere else on the cluster. If we can use the Kubernetes API to surface objects like the Knative plugin does, right, the Runtime Resource Visibility plugin, then all we ever have to do is worry about securing and curating that API pipeline to the Kubernetes API. We don't have to do all these other external things. So that's incredibly attractive.
I have a question.
Sure.
On the external services, needing those to install, I can see where if it's one difficult install could be totally worth having all the benefits that TAP provides. But I just wanted to ask, like, as a relatively new person on the scene, is it a matter of just working through it at install time, or is it a matter of maintaining all those external services? Like, is it a one-time problem, or is it something that needs to be managed, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, that these things don't just have a life at the time of install. They are living and breathing things. Obviously, Git is a great example. That's going to change, by the second as your team start to put their components out there, as they start to commit source code into that, et cetera. You're definitely going to need to maintain that. Same thing with all the others, even database. This is why what we'll often see is people use managed versions of these. So for a database, maybe I'm deploying out on Amazon. Well, I'll use Amazon's Postgres as a service. That way I don't have to stand up my own pod, manage and patch my own Postgres. I will just consume it from them. Git, tell you what, I'm not going to stand up private GitLab. I'm going to use GitHub or GitLab that they host for me, so that the care and feeding and patching and all of that somebody else can take. All I need to do is worry about talking to it. Maybe it's a token, et cetera. That same thing applies to all of these prereqs. And for us, we want to be able to surface the capability to just make it work. But at the same time, provide enough power so that as people have different use cases, maybe it's I am in an air-gapped situation and I can't use any external services. Maybe it's I'm in a highly secure location that needs to have everything on FedRAMP certified, something like that. We have to be able to provide that flexibility to accommodate those use cases, but still deliver a pleasant, usable experience. So that battle will continue, as we get more feedback from customers. We'll be able to decide, okay, these are the things that matter. These are the triaged list of things we need to improve moving forward. So let's look, we've talked about our lessons learned. Where do we go from here? Right? Obviously, we want more and more use cases to be able to be used by our Tanzu application platform. So there are many different components that make up Tanzu application platform, and to continue to onboard them is absolutely our goal, because that's how we will add additional functionality to this. At the same time, we are firmly committed to increased participation with Backstage and that open community. We've already done a number of contributions upstream into core Backstage to fix things like the design and theming system, that material UI, making sure that works so that when we put our Tanzu VMware themed one on top of it, it's applied correctly, right? We plan on dedicating teams and dedicating headcount to actually working with the OSS community to improve not just TAP GUI, but the upstream Backstage itself. Right. So you see design system implementation improvements, improvements in how it talks to the Kubernetes API, RBAC, both inside. So this would be, well, what if inside that castle you also locked all the rooms and required a key to which rooms you can get into? Sure, you had the drawbridge, but just because you're in the castle doesn't mean you have free run of the place. RBAC to be able to see what plugins should you see. When you're in those plugins and you get a list of applications or list of components, it'd be great if you only saw the ones you're supposed to see and you couldn't just click on show me everything. Right? This is an area where we're going to be contributing. The plugin system. This is an area we want to do a lot in, and this is going to be fundamental to the way it works, because that idea that you compile your plugins in at build time, you take an opinionated stance at build time for all the plugins you'll ever use. We got to get more dynamic than that. The idea of you heard us talk about making sure we onboard more roles into using TAP GUI. We do that by maybe dynamically turning on plugins if you're an operator, turn off plugins if you're a developer, and vice versa. And then even contributing just pure open source plugins. So there's a very healthy open source community around Backstage, and the ability to get some of our efforts out there. So things like maybe it's KPAC, maybe it's KApp controller, maybe it's a core Knative plugin. Any of those things from our lessons learned, let's get them into that core Backstage so anybody can take advantage of them. And then you see that last one, extending more personas. That really speaks to that plugin system that we're going to have to help mature. But yeah, so this is a lot of information. Right. Happy to take any questions that anybody has, or if you want to see anything.
If you make a plugin within the Tanzu application platform, are you able to make that, like donate that to the open source?
Yeah, so you could certainly use elements of the Tanzu application platform to build that plugin, etc. But the way that you would do the contribution is you actually check it into a Node.js repository, an NPM repository. So it doesn't necessarily, it's not something you run using that normal supply chain, but you can absolutely, the key would be that you could take an plugin that you developed and send it out into open source Backstage. We would also be able to grab it and start building off of it in TAP GUI, just because we are conformant and we are running the actual Backstage OSS code.
We have a comment too. Speaking of personas, infra teams often struggle with inventory systems. The TAP GUI seems like a big help there.
Yeah, and I'll echo back that we were just talking to a very large customer the other day, as well as another consultancy that specialized in this area. And they said, by far, the thing people care about and find the most revealing is discoverability. I didn't know we had that many services. I didn't know how they related to each other. One of our technical leads, Ben Hale, will reference that in order for this to be successful, you should walk into a customer and say, can you show me a list of all your applications and how they relate to each other? They're probably not going to have a lot of ways to do that. Yeah. That's a prime chance to implement something like Backstage.
I have a question, and maybe you went over this, but how are those applications discoverable? Are they tagged? Are they?
Yeah, so if you build it using the methods that we talked about, using App Accelerator, putting it through this supply chain, right, that is TAP, and then creating a catalog entry, you develop it, using inside the TAP ecosystem, but that doesn't mean that everything has to be there. Right? You can reference existing Kubernetes workloads simply by adding them to the catalog. So if we go back here,
I guess my question is about the searchability of the catalog. If I'm looking for everything that the checkout service produces, and I want to see everything that's gonna, I don't know, if I'm looking for something system-wide that I think will affect my microservice. Yeah,
so search is absolutely something that Backstage is improving now, even being able to, underpin this with very comprehensive, like Elasticsearch search engines. So yeah, searchability is something, basic searchability is already here, right? Being able to doing your basic filtering, and we can expose search buttons, etc. when you're looking for components, but more comprehensive keyword searches. Show me for all occurrences of a particular string, and you want to know everything that might have ever touched that. That's something we're going to be bringing as well.
Cool.
Anything else? Any other questions?
I was interested to find out that it runs on any Kubernetes distribution, which I see now how that works, but because this had Tanzu in the name, I made an assumption, a faulty assumption, that it would be related to our Kubernetes.
Yeah, and we absolutely test it. on our distributions, and we believe that that's, you know, one of the great places for enterprises to be able to adopt Kubernetes is through that Tanzu story, but
Mhm,
it could be a roadblock.
mhm,
And the reality is customers need to live in a multi-cloud world, and
Mhm.
those multi-clouds, sometimes they're running Tanzu, sometimes they're not. And if we
Mhm.
can all just settle on, look, if we target and skate to the idea of a conformant underlying API that has the same level of capabilities, regardless of where I need to go,
mhm.
it doesn't matter. And it shouldn't matter to the workload. So it doesn't.
The other thing I loved is the documentation. That just seems like the best. I'm sure we'd all relate to having like a ton of tabs open to certain document pages that you don't want to close because it was kind of hard to dig up that information.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I've totally been there.
This idea that, to me, this was, you know, this was something that struck me like a bolt of lightning. Where should the documentation live? It should live right next to the code that it talks about. If it's technical documentation, sure, maybe if it was user-facing documentation and manuals, that might go in a different repository, but right next to your catalog code or right next to the source code for your app should be your markdown files, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
That's the place where I write about all of the weird things that you have to do to our service because we, you know, couldn't figure out how to architect it properly.
And you know, that you heard me probably say, I'm sure if there was a game, every time Kris says the word contextual, right? But that is really one of the hot button ideas, that having information is one step, but being able to put that information in the appropriate spot relative to the other things that it's important, you know, or that are also important is key. So the place for the documentation about a service should be when I'm looking at the service. So yeah.
I'm just imagining myself as an operator clicking on that view tech doc link and then seeing like some, you know, the make docs alert box in like yellow or red. It's like, please delete this S3 bucket before restarting the service or something. You know?
If you're looking at the docs in this view, is there a place, like if I was viewing this and there's something unclear to me and I wanted to make a GitHub issue about it so the authors could clarify, is there a way for me to get to the GitHub page, or is there a button to do that on this page?
If you go click up one level and you see this view source, that's where you could do it.
Okay.
Right, but not directly from the tech docs itself. I think this is just the rendered markdown.
Got it.
But that's an area certainly of improvement. You know, as we start to get more and more feedback, being able to, you know, paint a toolbar across here with contextual links to, you want to create a issue based on exactly what you're looking at on screen, click this button rather than go back and do it.
Yeah, I believe there's actually something in Make Docs to enable that feature. So there's a Make Docs plugin because Make Docs is also pluggable.
Yeah, and that's actually what we use. You see the Make Docs config file sits right here. That's what's used to do the dynamic generation. So, you know. Yeah,
so if you had the Make Docs plugin for the link to, you know, edit this file, then that might pop up there, I suppose, in this rendered document that's being loaded from an S3 bucket, right?
Yep.
Does these Make Docs get built by what? Is that a build container, or does it happen in Backstage?
So you have it varies. There's lots of different ways you can do it. You can do it. Some customers will just run a batch process and kick it off with a cron job. At midnight, we build our docs. Others can do it much more automated at a specific interval. You can do it on cluster, you can do it off. Depending on the amount of documentation and the locations of it, you might need to change that. Expect to see some contributions here on making it a little bit easier to just have this documentation routine done transparent to you, right? As it is today in Backstage, you have to do a little bit of configuring to kick off that render process, schedule it if needed, right? And put it out there on that bucket.
I think certainly as like a document generator goes, I think the Make Docs build is not the fastest thing, but it's probably one of the most popular.
Yeah, and then you have to start asking questions. Well, do I want it that performed on the same cluster running my application? Ooh, is that a security risk? Is that too much of an additional workload? Have I sized the cluster? Am I going to compromise the performance of my application by running this doc generation job?
Yeah, there's kind of this dark part of that supply chain, which is that there are plugins in the make docs build, and then what network access does that thing have, and what compute is it on?
So we provide we and Backstage provide a number of ways for you to, tackle that problem. And we will continue to, again, that's where that user flexibility versus accessibility starts to come in, of how easy should we make that? How easy can we make that?
Is there a multi-cluster story here?
So TAP as it is today is definitely meant to live in a multi-cluster world, but the initial releases here are focused primarily on building a set of, a cluster installed in one location focused on one specific task. The reality will be, as we start to iterate, that will, start to flex out. Backstage has capabilities to be multi-cluster, so we, TAP GUI, do as well. The problem comes back to, let me see how fast I can switch to it. I guess the roadmap item where I talked about RBAC. When I talk to a cluster, everybody talking to a cluster uses the same token. That's the way Backstage does multi-cluster. And that's probably not great that everybody can see everything done via that same token. So we want to be able to work to extend the capabilities there so that we can provide RBAC. There it is. Yeah, RBAC inside through Backstage and with Kubernetes, so that every time a user makes a Kubernetes call to the underlying API, whether it be to show the catalog or look at resources, it's done using an identity that ties to exactly what their permissions should be on that Kubernetes cluster. So it's a problem we have to solve at the RBAC level before we really start to go crazy about showing multiple clusters and look at all the things I can see.
Yeah, there's probably hope there, because part of the tool set that's close, adjacent in the engineering solutions would be Pinniped. And I think if you haven't ever heard us talk about Pinniped before, what makes it really unique is that you can authenticate as a user or group with Kubernetes without actually modifying the Kubernetes API server options. That's the big feature with Pinniped. And that gets you that any Kubernetes experience, but then also, some capability, whether it's via impersonation proxy or some certificate trickery, to change the principle of who is talking to Kubernetes on the fly. And then, we have the CLI on the client side. Yep. But it's kube config based, and I think that there is this dissonance with developer portals and platforms in talking to Kubernetes, because web browsers aren't great at running CLI tools. Maybe there's something there with WebAssembly. We could run some of our Go in the browser, but it's tough. It's really tough to get that developer identity to get you, dropped privileges talking directly to Kubernetes or through to some API proxy without some sort of auth layer that's not Kubernetes itself.
Yeah, and I mean, there's larger problems with Backstage on that side of that config file is something that you store one time at install time. And so that token and all its privileges related to that or whatever it was at install time. So having something be a more dynamic token per user. Oh, and then reconciling with the auth provider, right, that you use to log in across all of those. We're definitely looking at Pinniped. That's a good VMware solution to this, but we also want to make sure that whatever we do is adopted by the larger Backstage OSS community so that this has enough inertia to, future plugins get, enabled with this by default, rather than we have to go and retrofit plugins to use our back changes that we've made. So yeah, we want it to come from the community rather than, directly from VMware.
We have a question in
So
the,
Cora,
yeah, you got it.
Cora has a question. Is the component diagram clickable or like navigable, or is the only way to go from one component to the next to go back up to the main search page?
Oh no, it's fully clickable. Come in, go to my system diagram. I can hover over every one of them, show me the Yelp DB component, take it right to it. So yeah, fully interactive. You can zoom in, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, this VMware Clarity themed stuff just really reminds me of the experience of using Octant as well. Sorry, Tiffany, I cut you off.
Yeah,
I was gonna say, so if you,
oh,
sorry, continue, and then I'll continue.
Yeah, so sorry. Yeah, so this is, it's important that we make sure we acknowledge the hard work of the Backstage team. This is actually all Backstage. All we did was change some of the colors and a little bit of the theming work on here, but the diagram part, that's all Backstage catalog.
So say I'm on the Yelp UI. Is there a way to connect from that to so if I clicked on the Yelp UI component, can you go from there to the next component, like the other things that's connected to, or do I have to hit the back button and then go click on something else to look through it?
Yeah, I would have to hit the back button or click back on system to take me back there, right? Or
okay, so there's no way trace through it.
There isn't. Yeah, there isn't. That's, we're looking at a number of improvements there from, breadcrumbs and all sorts of stuff. So, yep. All right.
This has been a wonderful presentation. I've enjoyed it very much.
Fantastic. Thank you guys for inviting us here.
Thank you for telling everyone about all this stuff. This is cool. And I don't know, I'm just a huge fan of presentations that involve some sort of user interface that's not just a CLI, because I'm like, oh, I see what's happening here.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? It's how do you help people? Because it's the challenge is whenever you're on the developer floor, right? You're on the engineering floor, how do you teach each other? How do you communicate? And we're always talking in abstractions. That's why whiteboards are so popular. A lot of people are visual or spatial learners. How do you communicate with each other so you can get on the same page, share the context, how we solve the problem, right? And sometimes that problem is a business problem. Other times it's operational, something's on fire. And I think, as somebody who's been on a platform team so many times, right? It's I look at these solutions and I'm I don't know, I'm skeptical. Do these people really know the patterns of work that we have? Is this thing gonna fit here? Is it gonna fit my culture? Is it gonna fit the way we teach each other? And then I got an infra backlog, we're trying to keep services running. And now we're going to have to take this bandwidth, go through this install, integrate GitLab, all this stuff. Is this going to be worth it? And yeah, I think that at the end of the day, when you're thinking about how people communicate with each other, it's the habits that we build, the way that we talk. It's making those things discoverable, pulling the source code, the runtime information, drawing a dependency graph, showing how things relate to each other, making sure that the documentation for the service is in one place and that there's a reasonable way to navigate between these things. It's you'd be very hard pressed to build that yourself or to, retrofit existing tools. It's one of the reasons why GitOps is very popular, right? Is because all of that stuff kind of gets aggregated into these monolithic Git UIs. But is there a better way that we can do it? Is there a more modular way? Pull in some build information, pull in Kubernetes information. Backstage is an answer to that. This is looking really cool. So.
And there's no one way to discover, to get the information, get at the information you need. You can get it however your mind works, if you want to go through, the diagram versus the docs versus the system list information versus the catalog, you can find what you need.
Yeah. In context with each other.
In context, at your fingertips. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure we've got a lot of folks in the chat and on the stream, and probably joining us later on YouTube and in the recordings, gonna be thinking about how TAP and TAP GUI can potentially change the way they work with their teammates. So it'll be it's pretty cool. It definitely the platform for building platforms, right? We've heard it multiple times. It's kind of the mantra surrounding Kubernetes is, what are you problem are you trying to solve with this thing? And this is a higher order solution to target a better developer experience. Pretty stoked. Yeah. So now that we're rolling out of the technical demo, and we've fried our brains thinking about how clicking buttons and sharing links in an organization changes the way that we work and build solutions to problems rather than problems to solutions. What's going to be our segue or our distracting diatribe out of this? I mean, we were talking about rocks and like city names.
Well, I think maybe this is a vanilla question, but how's everyone spending their holidays? Anything exciting?
Spending the holidays.
Yeah.
I assume you'll be.
That's a work in progress.
Yeah, I feel like it's just coming up on me so fast, and I'm like still just trying to finish out stuff from like the year.
You be in Hawaii for the holidays?
Yeah, I am out here. Instead of living in Denver, we've been here since before Thanksgiving, and it's been cool to have the warm tropical weather. But apparently, Colorado like didn't get snow until like just a few days ago. So.
With the cultural shift, do you see as many like houses decorated with Christmas lights and like trees?
Oh, Christmas is a big deal out here. I think it's bigger.
Okay.
Bigger deal out here than Colorado. Yeah, I mean, like over like in the middle of Waikiki, they have like a Santa statue and like Mr. and Mrs. Claus there, and they're like hanging out with their feet like dipping in the fountain. This is like on like a government building. And they're statues that are like 4 times people's sizes, and they're hanging out, and there's a penguin like getting ready like to like jump in the pool, and Mr. and Mrs. Claus got like their shakas up, and so
nice.
I think they take Christmas pretty seriously.
So tropical. Yeah. It's so tropical, like it's like reconciling the Christmas imagery with the tropical imagery is actually kind of pleasant.
Yeah, you head to the beach, like I go over there to play volleyball, but you look to your left and there's like, a group of people with Santa hats and their surfboards or whatever. And so
snowman out of sand, like a frosty.
That's not something I've tried, but I think that you could find some sand with the right consistency for that ambition bubble.
Yeah.
We also have to think that with a global, more of a global footprint on a lot of teams. I know ourselves, we have a lot of colleagues that are in the Southern Hemisphere, and to them, that's just normal. For us, it seems so juxtaposed of, what do you mean there's not snow? And what do you mean there's not this? And for them, they've never known that. Their only connotation of that might be films they see or other things. So it's been really interesting. We have a number of colleagues, again, on our team all over the world, and just hearing what Christmas is like is very, very eye-opening.
Yeah, we didn't do the traditional, hey, where's everyone from the Twitch chat coming in, like Detroit, Denver, LA, not doing all of the city call outs. I think it's like kind of a thing that we do on TGIK now and then, like where people coming in from.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone have any atypical traditions?
Atypical traditions.
Like holiday traditions, or like any that you especially...
I'm boring.
You're boring. I'll tell you something my family does. Well, my son and I started it. Whenever we give gifts, instead of wrapping them up, we will make a treasure hunt. So we'll give all the gifts to my brother Jordan at one time, and then we'll work together to make a clue that leads one to another until you get there.
That sounds so much more fun.
It might be like we're all adults now too, so the gifts we give are not especially extravagant or interesting anymore. So yeah, it's almost more fun than the gifts themselves.
Yeah,
I haven't done anything like that.
I started realizing that my Kubernetes projects were just getting a little bit unmanageable, because the YAML was just building these huge trees. So I decided to use YTT to decorate them instead. But yeah, so that'll be my 2021 tradition. And, yeah, New Year's, it's a big thing in like Japanese culture to share and make mochi. It's just, you make sticky rice, like kind of dessert style. And
I love mochi.
yeah, we put shoyu, it's just like soy sauce, and then sugar on the mochi. And it's like crunchy, and like you have like the granulated sugar on the outside with the chewy hot mochi that you just like fried in the pan. So that's like a tradition.
Oh my gosh, I want it so bad now.
It's so good. Yeah. I think Jerome is mentioning this Christmas tree manifest. Yeah.
I'll read it. There's a Christmas tree manifest or configuration file, the one that has all the possible options and features to showcase what you can do with the project tool. At least that's how I call it. I like it. Put some holiday music in the background. Somehow there's a driving path through all the decorated YAML.
Picturing like any of the piano instrumentals from like Charlie Brown Christmas, but just scrolling VS Code YAML.
Oh my gosh. And then like you can give a values file of like Christmas hints for where the treasures are.
Yeah, you got the Vignette video filter on it.
Jerome BRB starting a new YAML management framework called Slay. It's reindeer games all the way down.
That's so funny. Well, yeah, I guess maybe that should be a wrap for today. This has been really fun. I've really enjoyed having you on, Kris. Thanks so much for coming on and doing such a great job explaining Tanzu Application Platform.
Bringing the heat with the live demo too, so.
Yeah, my one last thing would just be a call to action. Anybody that's interested in trying it or Backstage, go out there. There's the beta for TAP is available. And then obviously you can go to backstage.io and plenty of documentation on how to build it and start playing with it if you want to go straight to the OSS project. But yeah.
Where can we get the beta for TAP?
If you go to, I believe, the Pivotal Network, you should, as long as you have an account on there, which I believe is free, you can go ahead and download directly from there. Beta 4 just was released this week. So all the cool kids are using it. And us too.
Absolutely. Well, this has been great, y'all. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you. You
Bye,
too.
friends.
Bye.
And I'm pasting the link for it.
Yes, Tiffany AI.
Tiffany AI, sign up for the beta.
Bye, Circular 9.